It's Sunday. It's June 12th, 2022. I'm watching CBS this morning, Channel 2. They went into a topic of discussion, like a conversation or a topic of discussion, which they broached before. But yesterday, on June 11th, I sat with Lewis, my Italian or Italian American, to discuss, like, he said that because there's two problems that I'm experiencing at the moment, which I can't seem to get around, is one is the education system that when I was born, I mean, I call it arrived, but when I was born through some natural process, to Linda and Lou, there's one set of circumstances with the education system, and who or what was driving the future, I don't know. And then there's this other set of circumstances of generational gaps and availability and sustainability, and what the humans are, where they're at this particular juncture or of dysfunction. It's dysfunction for me anyway, at the moment, by several faction in rational way of thinking. There's an irrational driver that I'm unclear about, but in rationale, the faction is very clear in what has transpired or happened and what the greater existential, irrational thought process was that drove it here around where I'm stuck. So I've heard these wonderful things, not just Italian, but of South American or Latin as well. Throughout the years, I've seen little vignettes about real world people, about they talk about costume designers. I mean, we're not talking about extravagant people with extravagant wealth, but it is wealth in knowledge and wealth in ability and dexterity and craftsmanship, for costume designers, like old Hollywood, where, I mean, again, from paper through the process, I don't have the desire to particularly do it myself, but I can from afar appreciate the craft was there and the talent was there. And I'm not talking sweatshops, I'm talking small, appreciated tailors and seamstresses, because people get lost in the minutia. Like, I want to talk and recognize the good in the world, and then it's like sweatshops come up and everybody, for some reason, in the generalization of thought process in the general public and with the programming that's on the TV, they pull the good in the world into this horrific direction of sweatshops, human rights violations, and all this other stuff. That's industry. That's this mass productive, churn them out as fast as possible, like in this wasteful menagerie that's erupted in the disgustingness of humanity. But in the good parts of humanity, there's this romanticism in the fact that at one point, and this gentleman is part of it, that's featured today on the television, he says, you know, he said he was in the 1920s or 30s, or maybe even 40s, they just dropped him off from Italy with keys to a business, and he opened the door, and there was no government at that point, and you could just somebody taught him the craft of being a tailor, and seamstress work. I mean, again, those things have been lost. I mean, my father yesterday was speaking about the Italians, my grandfather's day, between the late 1800s, early 1900s. In Italy, there was an expectation. You had 7 children. They were born, they were going to do certain work. My grandfather was something different. A painter, he was a craftsman, he was a painter, he proved himself. He was able to study or be an understudy to a master of craft who studied in Florence. I mean, like, there's this amazing bit of that, but the details are so much more important, because here in New York, in my life frame, there's been no exploration of craft. There's been no craft or purpose assigned, even as a fallback, like just for survival ability. Like, no cooking, there's been no cooking, there's been no tailor or seamstress. I mean, like, even Ziada, when I went down, she's my 9th decade. On the wall to her kitchen, she has the most beautiful, I mean, hand stitched craft project that she said that when her and Vicky were in school, it was a requirement for them. They were taught these things, these technical abilities that, I mean, she was able to come to New York. If she was able to make her own dresses, they knew how these things, I mean, they were so blessed and gifted with I mean, they might not have known it at the time, but even as children, these tedious tasks. But in the long run, it's so fundamentally important to have that. And in this 20th century America, it's totally gone. I mean, I haven't been given, we had like a small, just to learn a stitch, sewing class in my junior high school. But it was so sloppy and pathetic. I mean, I couldn't sew clothes together. I wouldn't know how. But like, it is just amazing how craftsmanship, quality of work, and directions even have just totally disappeared. Now, this gentleman says, the one from Italy, that another Italian had shown him the tailor, and he's tailored for entertainers and things, like a mom and pop shop kind of a way. But then he says that now, with this COVID thing, he had to go out and hire people for his store or shop. But the places that he's hiring from is what I question. Like, why? He's Italian. Why can't he hire other Italians? Why are they being forced into this new relation? Then while I was away, I had heard them mention that there used to be, I mean, I've heard on the television in America once something about a Medici, but they didn't go into great detail. That's just a sound for me anyway here within this nothingness that they've mentioned. And just recently, I went on this trip, Lou and Ada mentioned something about Savoy. House Savoy. And I'm like, Savoy? I was like, what? I was like, because if you put an R at the end of it, it reads savoir, which is whatever in the word for sea in en français. So I'm like, that is really curious. No, I've never heard of that before. Again, these words of the wind and these really important generational and ancestral whatever haven't even been addressed, voiced. I mean, and I don't know how to do a historical search on myself. I mean, where do you even begin? Didn't they say Ancestry.com, right? Did that. But there was something in that I couldn't get past. And then Elsa had to call me back, and there was like this big to-do about it, which I didn't understand what that was all about. I mean, like all of these little pieces of unclarity. I mean, it's just whatever. But this is somebody else's story. That I've got bits and pieces of generationally and ancestrally, like, and I mean, what's driving for the future? I mean, what are the children going to be doing? Because, I mean, their craft, their talent, there's something to be proud of. There's something that they accomplish, like small things. I mean, in my life frame's been totally taken away. My children, it's even more loose and like undefined, and I don't know how to find definition for them and myself. It's Channel 2.
The New Jersey tailor has been dressing some of the area's most recognizable TV figures and entertainers. But when the pandemic hit, business was bleak. As CBS 2's Astrid Martinez reports, now he's working to ensure the future of his family and custom-made clothing.
You could say the business of survival and tailoring is in Joe Camellia Jr.'s blood.
In his 30s or 40s, he opened up. He put a key in the door. There was no government and all that kind of stuff in those days.
For generations, Joe Jr. has continued a family tradition that began in the 1800s in Newark, New Jersey. His father, Joe Camellia Sr., was brought over from Italy to the U.S. at 11 years old and was abandoned. It was his future father.
Now that's what's really interesting. Brought over from Italy and just abandoned. Like, that's the part of my history that I'm just lost in this minutia of nothingness myself here. And then, of course, you're in this daily activity of just trying to find enough money and shelter. So it's a lot of busy work that distracts one from being able to figure out what the answers were as they arrived into this generation, especially if the adults are not speaking of it, and then how to find your way in this new world with this nothingness, and almost like everything being erased before you even enter the next, it's erased. So it's just, it's a evaporating system.
Mother-in-law who taught him the trade.
Now I'll get emotional. He was awesome. Sane, exactly, emotional, compassionate.
Those attributes were key to helping the family become a success, and they were all passed down to Joe. Camellia's Custom Clothiers has sewn suits for some of the country's most recognizable entertainers.
That's how I originally met Ali, who was an absolute sweetheart.
Joe Jr. has also helped dress some TV tough guys.
Stevie Van Zandt, Stevie Sharippa, Stevie Buscemi. Made only a suit for him. Well, James came because he liked the way Stevie looks. He says, well, you never wanted to meet the guy. You're going to your fancy guy in New York and blah, blah, blah. And Jimmy and I hit it off right off the bat.
But when the COVID-19 pandemic began, many people started working from home, and in-person events were being canceled, so there was no need for tailoring.
He's the best. He's the best around. 82 years. long time. And he's still going strong.
The friends Joe has made throughout the
So now my grandfather has passed away. He passed away in 1996 in his 8th decade. But again, I don't know if they're on 8th decade, or I don't know, I mean 7th or 8th decade at the moment. But around the same, and I also had heard that the particular migration that had came over was deemed the Great Migration. I'd never even heard of that in the schooling that they used or that they presented from the professionals within the Department of Education inside New York State for the time that I spent here. This Great Migration was not mentioned, although my 9th decade representative, a family elder, she said that they were told that when they came through Ellis Island, they were part of this Great Migration. I don't know how that existentially works within some other moving project, because again, there's been very little information that's been presented here.
The decades rallied around him to help the business stay open. He also received some federal pandemic assistance. And now, with businesses opening back up, Joe is finally seeing a steady flow of customers. He's working on teaching.
And so now he got federal funding, which gets confusing because he also mentioned when he first started, there wasn't this U.S. government bit. But now, decades later, there's some kind of federal funding involved. And again, these words get really confusing in the real world of how it actually works.
Teaching a new generation.
We brought them in from Ecuador, Dominican Republic. My main guy is Dominican Republic.
Why are those the choices? Is that what comes with the federal funding? I mean, where is this generation before knows something, teaches the generation just behind? Why do they have to go to some outreach program? Why can't they reach within some sense of unity of one's own whatever? I just don't understand. It just feels like somebody, some over whatever, just keeps pushing in small ways all of these extra pieces, and it's putting a divide with all these one-time, like, small little nobody's watching creeps in, and then all of a sudden it's like, how does one reach a hand that they need to hold or to find their way in the world?
What he's gonna do, so I'm gonna try to help them.
To make sure the craft and this tailor-made family legacy is stitched into history. In Nutley, New Jersey, Astrid Martinez, CBS 2 News.
Another check on our top stories still ahead.
It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole, Cattaruzza. It's Earth, solar system, Milky Way, universe, galaxy is broken. And it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.